Most about protect yourself for a long time. Touch go.
Well, for those who have been keeping up with the story coming out of the light heavyweight division involving Artur Beterbiev, unified champion Artur Beterbiev, and Fanlong Meng, you know, Artur supposed to be going over there in defense of his IBF title. We all know how strict they are with all of their mandates. He's supposed to be going over there to China to defend his IBF title against Fanlong Meng. And an issue emerged when Artur Beterbiev expressed reservations for having to go to China due to the ethnic cleansing of Muslims going on there. In case you're not already aware, Artur is a practicing Muslim, and he doesn't take too kindly to the ethnic cleansing of Muslims that's been going on in China. So he didn't want to go over there. And you know, as a result of that, he might have had to vacate his IBF title, the title he's supposed to defend against Fanlong. Well, as it turns out, Artur Beterbiev won't have to fight in China or vacate his IBF. The purse bid defense versus Fanlong Meng reportedly was voided as Chinese winners of the purse bid failed to make the initial deposit to the IBF. So the fight goes to Top Rank by default, who plan to stage it on March 28th in Quebec, Canada, or Moscow, Russia. I'm sure that either one of those two locations, either one of those two venue options, are more to the liking of Artur Beterbiev, the unified light heavyweight champion. It's welcome news for me because I didn't want to have to see Artur vacate one of those titles due to this business and political stuff. You know, I would have hated to see that at a time when the light heavyweight division and the titles within it are finally being consolidated, when we're that much closer to seeing the titles, all of them unified. I'd hate to have to see Artur vacate one of them for something like this, for something as trivial as where the fight takes place. That's the most news that this mandated title defense has made, because Meng Fanlong, as far as opponents go, he's a relatively unheralded opponent. You know, not many people know much about this guy. He hasn't been in there with the Sullivan Barreras, the Joe Smith Jr.'s, those kinds of light heavyweights. As it stands, the most recognizable name on Meng Fanlong's resume is the name of Frank Buglioni. Frank Buglioni, who Meng Fanlong stopped over the course of 5 rounds. You want to get to know Meng Fanlong, what you're going to notice almost immediately is that he's very statuesque for the weight, standing in at about 6'2", 75-inch wingspan. He's a southpaw, hailing from out of China with a professional record of 16-0 with 10 KOs. This is a guy who, down the line, could become a major player, could be formed into a formidable fighter, but here and now, if Artur Beterbiev is to be his very next opponent, I do favor Artur in that fight. Here's why. When it comes to Meng Fanlong, this is a guy who is more or less untested on the world stage, at the world level. As I stated earlier, you won't find names like Felix Valera or Sullivan Barrera or Joe Smith Jr., John Pascal, those kinds of fighters. You won't find those kinds of names on Meng Fanlong's resume, and what that communicates is that he still has a lot to prove. Ahead of one of the most devastating punchers, if not the most devastating puncher at the weight, the logical choice really would be Artur. You get a look at Meng Fanlong, you know what kind of fighter he is, what does he look like, how does he go about things, and as I stated, he's a southpaw, shows that southpaw jab, doesn't appear to be particularly fleet of foot.
He's not.
I mean, he's got a set of legs, you know, but who doesn't? At the end of the day, this is not the kind of fighter that's fighting on the balls of his feet. He does seem a bit flat-footed, and what that communicates is that he's drawing his power from the ground up, thereby explaining why, you know, the kid can punch, for what it's worth. He can punch. It's a trade-off. You know, a more athletic, fleet-of-foot kind of fighter sacrifices power. They sacrifice their power by fighting on the balls of their feet. They're trading power for mobility, agility. Whereas a guy who stands on his whole foot, a flat-footed fighter like Meng Fanlong, he's sacrificing mobility for power. You know, by standing on his whole foot, he does draw his power from the ground up. So whatever he does land has some salt on it. You know, that's the virtue. Hence characterizing the trade-off. And you know, for Meng, that might work against a certain caliber of fighter, a certain caliber of opponent, but I don't think it's going to work for him against Artur. I take you back to the Beterbiev versus Gvozdyk fight. Gvozdyk, who's statuesque for the weight, the same way that Meng Fanlong is statuesque for the weight, with the difference being that Alexander actually is more athletic, more fleet of foot. This is a guy who does bounce around the ring.
He can move.
Shows a good straight jab, good straight right hand, very effective at long range, long distance. But in spite of these virtues, Artur was actually able to catch up to him. Catch up to him and break him down. So if a more athletic fighter than Meng Fanlong can't shake and bake Artur Beterbiev, what chance does Meng stand of doing any better when he's a less mobile, more stationary target? What that communicates to me is that Meng Fanlong will be there to be hit. You know, oftentimes when Artur Beterbiev is brought up, what people talk about the most is his power, that he's a very devastating puncher. But the kid can box.
He got some tools.
Because in order for him to have caught up to Gvozdyk as much as he did and broke him down systematically round after round, that takes more than just punch. That takes genuine boxing acumen. And as we all know, Artur's got a great amateur background.
Did y'all forget?
Beat Sergey Kovalev 2 times in the amateur ranks. So it's not as simple as Artur being the bigger puncher of the two guys and Meng Fanlong being a bit flat-footed. It's also that Artur can actually box. He's got a good amateur background, and it's for this reason I favor Artur to win, and I favor him to win by way of knockout. You know, once this thing is finalized, whether they stage it in Moscow or they stage it in Quebec, regardless of the location, I favor Artur to win. I will add that I'm not sure Artur takes the best punch, and Meng, he can punch. I mean, the kid does have some salt on those shots. That Callum Johnson knockdown is still fresh in my mind. I mean, Artur's dangerous, no doubt about it. But I do question his chin at times. But, you know, in spite of that, in spite of those question marks, in spite of that variable, if you're gonna go with the logical choice in this fight is Artur Beterbiev to retain both the IBF and WBC titles, knocking out Meng Fanlong. So that's what I'm going to go with if and when this fight goes down. In lightweight news, Steve Kim just tweeted, Aram says that Vasyl Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez is now slated for some time in May. Could be MSG or the Middle East. But one thing is for sure, that's the next fight for the both of them. And to some, this might come off as a bit of a non-issue because so long as these two guys are fighting each other, that's all anybody really cares about anyway.
Yeah.
Understandable, I get it.
Yeah.
I just look at this as what could be the first hint that the fight's going down in Saudi Arabia. This might be what that is, because you gotta remember what Bob Arum said before. Before, he said, if the fight's gonna be in America at Madison Square Garden, for example, then the fight will go down in April. But if it's gonna be in Saudi Arabia, they'll push the date back to May. And what does the latest from Bob Arum state? What do you see in Steve Kim's tweet? That the fight is now slated for some time in May. So this really could be the first indication that the fight is going down in Saudi Arabia. Yet another clash at the dunes. And I think what that affects most perhaps could be when the people in America will see the fight and how they see the fight. one could make the inference that if the fight were going down at Madison Square Garden or the Barclays Center, the people over there at Top Rank and ESPN might try to stage it as a pay-per-view. They might try to do that if the venue is here in America. But if it's over there in Saudi Arabia, they really don't have to stage it as a pay-per-view because most of the money is going to be coming from the Saudis. So maybe they decide to stage it on ESPN Plus, which comes at a significantly reduced cost to the consumer than your traditional pay-per-view would. There's a couple of ways you could work this thing. I mean, one way they could work it to really maximize profits would be to, okay, you stage the fight in Saudi Arabia, you let the Saudi Arabian investors put up all their money, you stage it there, but what you do is, I'll tell you what you do. Pay attention.
What do you do?
You stage the fight at a time over there in Saudi Arabia that still would equate to prime time hours here in America.
Yeah.
That way, you could still bill it as a pay-per-view to an American audience. That's yet another angle of this thing, another way that they could play it. I don't know that they're going to do that, but it's an option. It's there. They might just as easily use the fight to boost ESPN Plus subscriptions. They could do that as well. They have several ways they can play this fight up because there's actually a demand for it here in America. It's one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting fight the entire lightweight division has to offer, and we've been watching this storyline unfold ever since Teofimo Lopez became known to the boxing community, the boxing public. Whether or not he would stay in character and keep that same energy once he's so confronted with Vasyl Lomachenko, because Teofimo and his father, they got no shortage of things to say about Vasyl Lomachenko. So the question became, is this kid gonna stay in character if he has to fight Vasyl Lomachenko, or is that facade gonna fall apart like a house of cards once he actually has to deal with him? And so far, so good. Teofimo Lopez is about to have the fight. He's staying in character. He's letting it be known that he doesn't like Vasyl Lomachenko on a personal level, you understand. So this is very intriguing, very enticing, because Teofimo, for what it's worth, he's a very strong puncher. He shows boxing acumen. Look at how he became a champion. Sensational. It has all the makings of a highly entertaining match where you're not quite sure what's going to happen. I mean, the logical choice to some might be Vasyl Lomachenko because he can punch at 135, but he can do a lot more than just punch. However, Teofimo packs the kind of punch that could turn things around at any given moment. All he's got to do is land. And you know, Vasyl Lomachenko, he does get touched up. I mean, let's be honest, it's a boxing match. At some point, something might get through it. Very well could. So that has all the sizzle, all the intrigue to sell that fight to an American audience as a pay-per-view. They could play it that way. They could not play it that way. They could decide to use the fight to boost ESPN Plus subscribers because they know that people here want to see it. But as I stated earlier, the fact that they're talking about staging this fight sometime in May, that is more or less an indicator that the fight itself could land on foreign shores. We'll see what develops as time progresses. Moving on, we finally have confirmation of what is the last leg of the World Boxing Super Series' second season. The final in the cruiserweight division that will see Beterbiev-Breidis squaring off against Junior Dorticos. Things to know about this matchup. The Ring Magazine title will be on the line. Previously, you know, you had the IBF on the line, you had the WBO on the line, and the WBC. So the winner of the fight was going to emerge a unified champion holding 3 of the 4 major titles at the weight. But as it stands, you know, the only alphabet title on the line is, in fact, the IBF that Junior Dorticos is currently holding. But the winner of the fight won't just be the IBF champion. They will be in possession of not only the Muhammad Ali trophy, but the Ring Magazine title. The fight's going down in Beterbiev-Breidis' backyard of Latvia. And, you know, it's common sense when it comes to staging the fight in Latvia that Beterbiev-Breidis has more of an audience there than Junior Dorticos has anywhere in the world. You know, I mean, you stage that fight in America, and it's going to fly below the radar, whereas if you stage it in Latvia, it's an event involving a local hero. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense that the final go back to Latvia, where you're able to sell more tickets for the thing. As far as the matchup itself, it's anybody's guess, because Junior Dorticos, he does have his limitations as a boxer, you know, I mean, who doesn't? But for what it's worth, he has the kind of concussive knockout power that could end a fight at any given moment. Look at what he did to Andrew Tabiti. I actually picked Tabiti to win that fight. You see how it worked out. You know, not only was he getting outworked and bullied around by Dorticos, but he flattened him, effectively taking his O. The thing is that Beterbiev-Breidis is a cut above and Andrew Tabiti. He's more battle-tested at the world level, on the world scene. He gave Alexander Usyk his hardest fight to date, okay? Beterbiev-Breidis is no slouch. And the fight going down in his backyard, as opposed to Junier's, well, that's also working for him. I have to say that I feel that while Junior definitely gets the edge in power, the better tactician, the better strategist would have to be Mayris. Beterbiev-Breidis, I feel, is a more technically sound boxer, a more versatile guy than Junior is. But it's a 50-50 fight because of Junior's power. When Junior can get full extension on the punch, fire those shots long distance from the outside coming in, he generates some of the most destructive power the entire division has to offer. But I think it's there that Beterbiev-Breidis' window of opportunity lies, that Junior is not all that good mid-range to inside, and that just so happens to be Beterbiev-Breidis' sweet spot. Beterbiev-Breidis is not an outside fighter, so I envision a situation to where there's going to be a lot of wrestling, there's going to be a lot of clinching, that in order to offset the destructive power of Junior Dorticos, Beterbiev-Breidis might play him close to the chest and try to fight him in the pocket. Fight him in the pocket where it's that much more difficult for Junior to get full extension for his punches, thereby disarming that destructive power of his. Now, I do think that that is easier said than done, because Junior Dorticos is a fastball pitcher, so to speak. This is a guy that fires that 1-2 at the same intensity. He always throws with bad intentions. He's always looking for that knockout. So a good amount of time is going to be spent staying off the center by Beterbiev-Breidis. You know, stay off the center, get close to this guy, let your hands go. And you know, if things are getting kind of hairy, you tie the guy up. Hopefully the officiating for the final will be better than what it was for the semifinal, because the semifinal, as entertaining as that was to me and you, that thing was chaotic. It was a melee. I mean, it's because of the semifinal that Beterbiev-Breidis didn't get to hang on to that WBO title, because these guys were fighting well after the bell, knockdowns were scored,
Rabbit punches.
guys are fouling each other, this guy's, you know,
Hitting behind the head.
throwing elbows and all sorts of stuff's going on. So hopefully the officiating for the final will be better than it was for the semifinal. But as far as, you know, clinching and inside fighting, that really is Beterbiev-Breidis' window of opportunity to simultaneously offset the power of Junior Dorticos and win this thing. He's better in the pocket than Junior is, because Junior, he's got really long arms, and it's hard to fire short, tight, compact hooks when you got those really long arms. It's a great fucking matchup, and we'll get into a full fight breakdown as the fight date approaches, but I'm just glad that we're finally gonna get to see this portion of the saga, the final for the World Boxing Super Series' second season, come into fruition.